There were a lot of people hacked off last night because the Fifth Circuit decided to send the pistol brace rule back down to the district court. That was always going to happen. I don't know where people's minds have been. In the comment section of my most recent video, many of you confirmed that you had indeed had your subscription settings altered without your knowledge. So just because you are seeing today's video doesn't necessarily mean that your stuff hasn't been messed with at some point. So go check it out. Make sure that it is the way that you want it to be. Today's topic is going to make no one happy, but particularly it is not going to make the people who want to control the narrative happy. So if you interact with this video in some way, it signals to the machine that more people need to see it, irrespective of whether or not certain people are putting their hands on the scale. And then lastly, before we get started today, what I want to say is that I don't normally ask for this sort of thing, but if you are a content creator or an editor or something like that that has access to your own platform, if today's message resonates with you, I'm going to ask you to please share today's video because I think it's an important topic to discuss. Thank you very much. I understand that you are frustrated with your government. I am frustrated with my government. In fact, I would say that that is the healthy thing to do and probably the default position that most American citizens should occupy most of the time is frustration with government. I also understand that you are frustrated with your content creators because there has been a large uptick in the amount of Second Amendment coverage and content related to Second Amendment coverage on the interwebs at large. We've got our established outlets, you know their names, Jared over at Guns and Gadgets, Braden over at Langley Outdoors Academy, Anthony the Armed Scholar. You know, these guys have their stuff down to a well-crafted, refined art. They're providing excellent content on a regular basis. And then you also have the new guys. And I would classify myself as a newbie because while I've been creating content in the firearm space for over a decade now, I've only been covering the Second Amendment news cycle for about 7 months, and I'm still refining that down to something that works well for you guys. There are many of us that are making an effort to cover the issues substantively that are important for you to know about and to be well informed about and be active on. And then you have the content creators, and this does not matter what kind of content we are talking about. There will always be a phenomenon where you have a popular topic or issue. People will flood in from everywhere because they recognize that it's good for clicks, good for likes, good for ad revenue. And they are there solely for the purposes of garnering support, viewers, subscribers, whatever their motive is. That's the reason that they are there. And they almost always indicate themselves with super clickbaity shit. I empathize with your frustration in that regard. It sucks when you click on a video and you think it's going to provide information or value to you, and it just comes up short because it's a rehashing or regurgitation of something you've already heard for the purposes of garnering whatever support it is that they are looking to gather. It's exceptionally important, though, that we add those voices to our fight right now, because those of us who have been working in the Second Amendment space for decades now will tell you that up until very recently, we have been absolutely been getting our butts kicked. Only recently have we been able to match our opposition. And the reason that is quite simple. Both sides of any issue are controlled by a vocal minority, and then the people filter in at their various locations across that spectrum. If you look at the vocal minority that opposes the Second Amendment, we're talking about people who are willing to forego certain aspects of normal societal life, like jobs, hobbies, things like that. They get bussed into various protests and they do all kinds of rioting and things like that. And then you look on our side of the equation, and you've got a bunch of people who do most of their bitching around the lunch table at work. And then by the time they get off work, they're tired and they don't really have a whole lot to contribute after hours, after everything is closed, because they worked all day. Do not mistake me. This is vital. It generates fantastic baseline grassroots support, but very rarely does that support translate to active activism. If we're intellectually honest, I would say that the majority of activism as far as Second Amendment is concerned, occurs online, and a lot of that happens through outlets like this one. And if you want to discount the effectiveness of that kind of activity, then you need to look no further than yesterday's opinion out of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals discussing what should happen with the pistol brace rule. They expressly talk about YouTubers and their impact on what became the acquisition movement for pistol braces and the process of garnering large quantities of dissent for the proposed pistol brace regulation. If you listen to the oral arguments related to that opinion, the judges quote those numbers ad nauseum. And while judges are not beholden to voters, they are appointed, public perception does weigh into their decision-making process in addition to statutes and precedent and all those sort of things. Simply put, judges watch YouTube and use social media as well. So if there's a whole bunch of positive commentary surrounding an issue, it only helps us. But all that said, our enemies are still stronger than we are, because I'll just put it to you like this. Which makes a larger impression on you, a stronger impression on you? 10 YouTube videos on a topic, 100 YouTube videos on a topic, or burning a fucking building down? That's the type of thing that we are fighting against. At great personal risk to myself, I might add, there are some of us who are FFLs and have waded into the Second Amendment news space because we believe that the issues are important to cover, even at great personal risk to ourselves, because we are directly criticizing the agency that holds our license to operate. And I'm under no illusion that when my next compliance inspection comes around, that my shit had best be perfect. So if you would like to contribute to what I see as a war chest for the inevitable lawsuit that will result from the revocation of my license for my political speech, then you can visit my crowdfunding pages, of course, in all the places relevant. Instead of being the FFL that sits quietly and keeps their head down above the radar to try not to garner the ire of the powers that be, we have stepped out into the light and said, this is wrong, this is not okay, and we're going to run our mouths about it because the people that put us here need to hear this news and this information. But still, on every single Second Amendment advocacy video I do, or covering any of the updates from the courts, you get somebody somewhere that says, you're just doing this for personal gain. You're doing this for clicks and views. You're just whipping people up. There's no substantive updates from these. These aren't decisions. These are opinions. Nothing has changed. These rules are still in effect. They're still messing with us. The sky is falling, and I wish that everything would just go back to the way that it was. To that person, I have news for you. It ain't never going back to the way that it was. It has been on the trajectory of not going back to the way that it was since 9/11/2001, when our government instituted a whole bunch of new laws that allowed them to grab substantial amounts of power and consolidate it. And they have consistently and incrementally increased and flexed that power all along for the last 20 years. You have just not noticed it because you have not been paying attention. And then finally, the government reaches out and touches you, and suddenly it's a crisis and everything needs to hurry up and get done. Well, I have news for you. That is not the way that it works. That is not the way that it has ever worked, and that is not the way that it is ever going to work in the future. So I'm going to lay out for you what is going to happen with the pistol brace situation. Believe it or not, we're on the fast track. There is a slow track, and we might end up there if this discontent gets any more out of control. There were a lot of people hacked off last night because the Fifth Circuit decided to send the pistol brace rule back down to the district court. That was always going to happen. I don't know where people's minds have been, but that was already a foregone conclusion because the district court never actually got to hear the case or rule on its merits. FPC said, hey, there's a whole bunch of people here that are likely going to be impacted by this. We think we're entitled to a preliminary injunctive relief. We understand that it's an extraordinary circumstance. But we think that we qualify. And the court said, no, we don't think that you do. So they said, hey, Fifth Circuit, we're on a time crunch here. We really think we ought to have this. Oh, well, that's probably a prudent decision to do. And they went ahead and approved it. That's what this whole thing was. They've now sent it back to the district court so they can actually rule on the merits of the case. And by the fast track, what I mean is this is the challenge on administrative procedure and constitutional grounds. You could end up challenging it on criminal grounds, which is a much slower process. Somebody actually has to be prosecuted for it. So be happy that we're worrying about the constitutional grounds and the procedural grounds of the rule right now, instead of dealing with it in that way. This is going to end up at the Supreme Court one way or the other. FPC wins, then the ATF's going to appeal it to the Fifth Circuit. And if they win, lose, or draw at the Fifth Circuit, they're going to appeal it to the Supreme Court. If we end up going the slow track route and somebody gets prosecuted for it after the whole thing falls apart because everybody's discontent about the length of the process and is too busy with other parts of their lives to pay attention to what's actually going on, well, then we have to start the whole process over again after a criminal trial. If the Fifth Circuit yesterday had said, no, nationwide injunction, and the ATF had appealed to the Supreme Court, if they did that yesterday, then that means that at its fastest pace, it could have made it to the Supreme Court for an actual decision by the Supreme Court by fall argument schedule, which means that you won't get a definitive answer on whether the pistol brace rule is unconstitutional or not until next summer. That's the fastest that it can happen. So you best belt yourself in, because what you're actually looking at is probably something more like maybe late 2024, 2025. Case in point, look at the bump stock situation. That shit is still in the courts. So prepare yourself for the elevator ride through the courts over the course of the next year or so while this thing is litigated. It's going to take a minute to come to a real decision, and understand that you have to be politically active. There is this fallacy that has been infected into our society where we think that we are entitled to relax. Like we just get to not be politically active. You hear it all the time. People like, oh, I don't want politics in my whatever. No, you don't get to do that. America was never meant to operate in a state of tranquility. It was meant to operate in a constant state of conflict. And Benjamin Franklin said it himself when he was asked whether we had a monarchy or we had a republic. He said, a republic if you can keep it. It is your responsibility to be out and be politically active, to be well informed. And that's what these outlets are trying to do, is give you the information that you need to have. Whether that adversely impacts your temperament or not, well, I'm sorry. But maybe you should be a little bit irritated about the things that are going on in your government, because the previous generation put you where you are today by ceding their political advocacy power to groups like the National Rifle Association that piddled away, squandered it, and used it as bargaining chips for greater corporate interests. You got to get with the program, because you best believe that the people who are going to perpetrate these evils on you and their minions are on their program, and they've been on their program for decades, and they're coming for you. Or I suppose you can just stick your head in the sand, wrap yourself in the Gadsden flag, sit back, watch some sports ball, and go take a good old bath in some Bud Light. Don't tread on me. You can't make it through a 6-minute YouTube video on issues that actually matter to your day-to-day life, and you think that you have the perseverance to do the other thing.